Welcome to the Gridiron Central Preview Show. I'm your host, Jim Allred. Beside me, Matt Davis, the voice of high school football from 95.7 The Ridge. It's coming, Matt. It's coming. There we go. I don't think the explosion sound effect Matt does. It's good. Heading into the third week of the high school football season, a whole slew of interesting games to talk about. We start off as the Pepperell Dragons, 0-2 on the year, traveled to face the Adairsville Tigers, now 1-1 on the season. Matt, what do you think about this one?
You know, I think Pepperell has kind of performed how we expected they would the first couple of games. They're a team that is still trying to find themselves. In the game against Cedartown last week, I understand they were able to move the ball at times, but whether it was a fumble or a penalty or, you know, just a situation that went wrong, things just didn't go in favor of the Dragons, which tells you they're still trying to gain some experience. This is going to be another tough game for them because the Adairsville Tigers, as we've talked about for the last several weeks and for the last couple of years for that matter, has a pretty powerful offense, which is going to be a lot for any defense to handle. And so from that standpoint, I think Pepperell's going to have some struggles in this game. But I think the difficulties that they have early on are going to really help them as they go along through the season. So despite the fact that the first couple of games have not gone very well for the Dragons, and this game potentially won't either with the firepower you have in Marcus Childers and, of course, the running backs that he has behind him, the receivers, just everything going well for Adairsville. You know, I think that that's going to be a good thing no matter what the outcome of the game is for the Pepperell Dragons moving forward. So tough night for the Dragons, a learning experience. The Adairsville Tigers pick up another win in my prediction.
Gotcha. And I was actually there at the Pepperell game last week, so I know exactly what happened. Basically, Pepperell controlled the entire first half 3 times in the red zone. Unfortunately, those 3 trips in the red zone were only worth 6 points. Touchdown to begin with, missed the extra point, missed a point-blank field goal, and then turned the ball over on downs. In the second half, penalties and turnovers hurt them. You know, it was one of those crazy things with Pepperell. And I look at Pepperell as the defense isn't too bad. They shut Nick Chubb down. I was actually mocked on the radio show last week when I mentioned that Pepperell could hold Nick Chubb under 180 yards. No one else on the radio show thought that. Guess what? They held him to 126 yards. They were able to do that. Unfortunately, the offense just could not get the ball in the end zone, even though the time of possession was greatly in their favor in the first half. They were down 14-6 at halftime. They're facing an Adairsville team that is a better overall offense than Cedartown. Yes, their running backs may not be as good as Nick Chubb, but they have 2 or 3 of them. They can throw the ball well. Their defense, still a work in progress for the Tigers, but they have very good special teams, something that I don't see out of the Dragons. Pepperell's going to come out and try to control this game early on. Because they run that wing T, it could take Adairsville's defense a half, just like it took Northwest Whitfield's defense a half and Cedartown's defense a half to really start shutting the Dragons down. So if Pepperell can get a lot of points early, 2 or 3 touchdowns early, they have a chance. I think Adairsville's going to be able to outscore them in the end, but I think this game could be closer than a lot of people think. I'm going with the Tigers here, but if the Dragons can force some turnovers and get up early, they might have a chance to win. Moving on, Gordon Lee at R. Murchie. The Trojans 2-0 in the season, visiting the 0-2 Indians. And as we learned yesterday, Tuesday, as the power rankings came out for Class A, Gordon Lee sits atop the public school power rankings with 2 wins over AAA foes. Now, granted, it's way too early in the season to be worrying about the power rankings. Those things usually don't level out to the 6th or 7th game of the week. What I will see in this game is that Armurchie hasn't been able to score many points on anybody. They might be able to score more points on Gordon Lee, but Gordon Lee has a pretty good running offense. They can throw the ball. They can run the ball extremely well. I think the Trojans maybe not run away with this, but win by at least 17. What do you think, Matt?
I was reading a story the other day that I thought was really cool and interesting about Gordon Lee, but a couple weeks ago, I believe it was LFO they played in their first game. Zach Cobb, who is their top running back, he fought through a stomach virus to gain 235 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Yep.
And the leadership that shows from a young man to the other team, you know, other players on the team, that is just tremendous. And that's just one of those things that you can't even place a value on that.
Definitely.
To give an illustration of that, last week Coala Creek managed to slow him down, only to find other players on that team that were ready to fill in the hole that was, you know, vacant from him not being able to perform against that defense, because obviously they put several guys on him to try to slow him down. Maybe they were inspired by what he did the week before. I would imagine that probably factors in. So the point is, there's obviously some depth in terms of the running game for this particular team, Gordon Lee. Meanwhile, Armurchie last week, they struggled as we anticipated they would. You know, they did put together one strong drive in which they scored in the game. They've got to build on that success and gain some confidence from that. And one of the things they've really got to do is try to stay motivated in a situation where, let's face it, last year they only won 1 game. This year they've lost their first couple of games, and they've gotten beaten pretty bad. So keeping that motivation level and that work ethic where it needs to be to improve has got to be extremely difficult for young men in that situation. So that is something they've got to do. So the thing is Almerchi, despite the fact that I think they're going to lose this game, I think more importantly for them is just trying to get better and better. Yeah. And of course you're going to be worried about the scoreboard. The guys want to win, but you got to look at the positive things that happen in the game and try to build on that rather than dwelling on the fact that you're losing games. So I picked Gordon Lee, but I'm hoping that Almerchi will make some strides in this game in terms of experience.
Definitely so. And the thing about that, Gordon Lee has a lot of seniors on their team. Almerchi has a lot of sophomores on their team, a lot of underclassmen. That being said, too, hey, this is a non-region game, has no effect whatsoever on the playoffs. Last year, Coosa lost their first 5 games and still made the playoffs. So there's still a light at the end of the tunnel for Almerchi. Sure. Moving on, Calhoun at Carrollton, a game I picked back in the spring edition of Gridiron Central when I said, and I stand by it right now, Calhoun's 49-game regular season winning streak ends Friday night in Carrollton. Calhoun 2-0 on the season. Of course, we just said 49 straight regular season wins dating back to a loss to Cartersville back in, 08, 07? I can't even remember which year it was now. Carrollton is 2-0 on the season. Very good. Last week, Calhoun beat Dalton 17-2, overcame 5 turnovers to beat Dalton. Let's put it this way. If Calhoun has 5 turnovers against Carrollton, Carrollton will score 70 on them. Calhoun is going to lose this game. Calhoun Yellow Jacket fans, rejoice because you love it when I pick against you. I'm picking against you. You lose by 17, Matt.
I don't remember the last time that I picked against Calhoun. A couple of things that really stick out to me in this game. Carrollton was a team on their way last year. Mm-hmm. They look like a team that has arrived so far this year. Obviously, we're early on, but they beat Oxford, Alabama 35-14. They lost that game last year. They beat Chapel Hill 63-0. The numbers they're putting on offense are just incredible, not to mention their defense has only given up 14 points in 2 games. On the flip side of that, Calhoun hasn't been putting up the explosive numbers on offense like they did last year. Let me throw out a couple of numbers for you. Last year, after their first 2 games, they were averaging 49 points. This year, 27 points. That's a pretty big drop. And that concerns me going into this game. It's obvious that Calhoun is a good team, but maybe not as proficient in terms of their offense as they were last year. And for that reason, for the first time that I can remember in a couple of years, I'm picking against Calhoun. I'm going with Carrollton in this game. I think they can be competitive in the game, but I just think that Carrollton is a little bit further along this year than Calhoun is, so I'm with you on this one.
Gotcha, and there's a little misleading fact there from Matt. Yes, they scored a lot of points on offense in the first 2 games last year. They also averaged giving up almost 29 points in those first 2 games as opposed to this year when they've given up 5.
That's a very good point.
And as far as they've haven't given up a touchdown yet unless I'm battling. Maybe they did against Ridgeline. I can't remember if it was a touchdown or field goal, but they didn't give up an offensive score to Dalton. So Calhoun's defense at this point last year was not this good. Obviously the offense is still a work in progress. So you never know. Like I said, I think Carrollton's going to win. I would love for Calhoun to get this win and keep that winning streak going. Absolutely. We'll have to wait and see. Cedartown at Lafayette. The Bulldogs 2-0 on the season. The Ramblers 0-1 on the season. They actually had a bye week to open the season. Nick Chubb and company visit Lafayette. Matt, what do you think?
Lafayette really struggled last week, and that was the first opportunity that we got to experience Lafayette at all this year. So we really didn't know what to expect going into the year other than the fact that they have their new training facility and they're trying to move the program forward, new coach, new system, all those sorts of things. Well, Cedartown, one of the things that really sticks out for me for them last week is, as you mentioned earlier, Pepperell was able to hold Chubb back to only 129 yards, even though he did get in the end zone a few times in that game, and they were still able to put up a pretty good amount of offense in terms of the final score in that game. And one of the reasons for that was they didn't air out a tremendous amount, and the quarterback, I'm sure he wasn't excited about his percentage. He was 8 of 17 passes for 123 yards and a touchdown. But they've proven that they're trying to diversify on offense, which is something we've said they needed to do for a long time, and they're obviously making that stride forward. And I don't think that bodes well for Lafayette going into this game. I think Cedartown's just going to be too much. I also would like to predict that Chubb is not going to have another night in this game, that he goes only 129 yards. I think he gets back to 300 or so in this game, and it's going to be kind of a typical night for him, but I'm going with Cedartown.
Well, right now, anybody who watches the Pepperell game tape saw what Pepperell's defense did. They basically had 4 guys. It may not have been 4 guys every time, but when the minute Chubb had the ball, they tried to get in the backfield and hit him in the backfield. Now, he still had a very solid night. Cedartown had a short yard on a couple of occasions. That's probably really the reason why Chubb only ended up with 129. He would have had more because they would have been further down the field, but when you're 30 yards from the end zone and 10 yards from the end zone on a couple of different series, what are you going to do? The quarterback play got better as the game went on. Some of those early passes, the receivers were open. Either they were overthrown or they were dropped. As the game went on, it got better. I talked to Coach Hendricks after the game. He said, man, we are working on that passing game. The other thing I think Cedartown might want to work on is sometimes using Nick Chubb as a diversion, because it seems like everybody in the stadium knows what's going to happen. It's a short run and play. You know who's going to get the ball. If they can develop a couple of plays, maybe a reverse, maybe a diversion play, they have the backs. They can bust some big ones open. So as far as Lafayette goes, Chad Fisher came over from Gordon Central. I don't really think he's putting a new scheme in. He's kind of just brought over what he had Gordon Central because Lafayette was trying to play an up-tempo style to begin with, so that's not new to them. Basically, the way I look at it is, Lafayette is an up-and-coming team. Cedartown really thinks they're a playoff team. I'm not going to argue with that. I think Cedartown wins this game. One more to talk about before we go to the commercial break. Darlington travels to play Chattooga. The Tigers 1-1 on the season, had a bye week last week after the beating they took from Cartersville the week before. The Indians haven't had any rest from the beatings they've taken the first 2 weeks, as they are 0-2 on the season. Obviously, Chattooga in 7AA, Darlington in Region 6A. I'll jump in and say this real quick. Chattooga hasn't had much offense, or if they've had offense, it hasn't resulted in any points. Darlington missing at least one key player on defense. I don't know if he'll be back for this game or not. The Tigers have played two very good teams in Murphy, North Carolina, and Cartersville. Chattooga's played two Midland teams. I think, although the class differential here, I think the Tigers are going to win this game. Matt, what do you think?
I agree with you on this one. I mean, Chattooga, you mentioned their lack of offense. They've only scored 12 points out of their first couple of games. They've given up 48 and 30 points respectively. That has just been a tough first couple of games for Chattooga. Granted, Darlington's going up to Little Bighorn. They're playing on the road. They're looking to bounce back from a very difficult game against Cartersville. Got pretty banged up in that game. But the thing is Darlington, they've had two tough teams they played against, you just mentioned. They had great success the first day. They had a tough time against Cartersville. Everybody expected that to happen. I mean, especially when you're watching those two teams come out on the field together and you see all the numbers that Cartersville has in terms of, big players. They don't have a tremendous amount of that, but they got a lot of numbers, a lot of depth. They're, shifting guys in and out of the game. They've got a lot of great skill players. That was going to be a tall order for Darlington. And they hung in there. They did the best they could in that game. They're going to be up for this game. They've had a week off. They've had a couple of weeks to prepare for Chattooga. I think you're going to see big things from Darlington in this game. They're going to pick up a big win against Chattooga and bounce back from their loss last week. And then, of course, after this weekend, you're getting ready for region play.
Got region play right around the corner. Right after the commercial break, we'll talk about 6 more key games coming up on Friday night.
Begin your future at Georgia Northwestern Technical College. We offer degrees, diplomas, and certificates in over 200 programs of study. Choose a career in business, health, industrial, or public service. With the flexibility of day, evening, and online classes at any of our 5 campus locations, getting your education at GNTC has never been more convenient. There are many financial aid options available, including student loans. Apply now. Georgia Northwestern Technical College. Your college, your town, your future.
Welcome back to the show. We always like to thank our sponsor, Georgia Northwestern Technical College, for helping bring the Emmy-nominated Gridiron Central to you for the 7th consecutive year. Back to the football action. Haralson County at Coosa. The Rebels 1-2 on the year. We'll visit the 1-1 Eagles. Of course, Coosa's loss last week was in overtime to Rockmart. Not a bad loss. Haralson County's one win has been against Temple. Not traditionally a powerhouse team. Last year, Coosa lost this game by a single touchdown. It's at Coosa. And for me, this game is interesting in the fact of, in previous years, this is kind of that game you look at Coosa and say they really need to win it, and unfortunately the Eagles would find a way to lose it. They have a big region game next week. They'll start region play against Pepperell actually on Saturday in the Shrine game next week. To me, this is a very important game for Coosa. They need to get the win. I think they will get the win. I say Coosa wins this game and heads into region play 2-1. Matt, what do you think?
I like this Coosa team. I had the opportunity to watch them for the first time last week, and much like any young team with a sophomore quarterback, they made their mistakes, they took their lumps, but as Todd Wheeler said in his article with Rome News Tribune, they scratched and clawed their way, both teams, and Rockmart ended up on the winning end of things. But I think that there were some really positive things in this game for Coosa, and one of the things that really sticks out in my mind is their diversity in terms of things they're trying to do on offense. Because I can name several guys that contributed to their points. Of course, Cornejo, who had a few field goals in the game, one that was clutch that pushed them to overtime. Then Robbie Davis, who was the first man to get a touchdown for Coosa in the game. Then you also have to mention the 50-yard pass play to Isaac Bradley. You also have to mention the fact that the young quarterback made some decisions by not being aware of the coverage and throwing a couple of picks in the game that were costly to the team. But one of the things I really liked about it was Todd Wheeler was taking some chances on his young players and finding out how they respond to certain situations before you get to region play. So this is the time to do those sorts of things and kind of figure out what you're working with. So I think there were, like I say, a ton of positives in this game for Coosa. On the other hand, you look at a very, very sloppy game. I don't think I've ever seen a team get as many penalties as I saw Rockmart get in that game. As a matter of fact, if the name of the game was going backwards, they would have scored a couple of touchdowns. It was so bad in terms of those penalties. So I think from that standpoint, it's kind of unfortunate that Coosa was not able to find a way to win that game. You look back to the first half, they had a 7-0 lead and threw an interception from their own territory that was ran back for a touchdown that gave Rockmart the lead going into the half. Now, granted, they responded when they came back out on the field, but at the same time, they should have had a 7-0 lead going halftime. But like I say, they're figuring things out. They're figuring out how these kids respond in certain situations, and they're learning a lot. So I think this is going to move that learning experience forward. I think Coosa is going to be a better team than Haralson County. I don't have a lot of knowledge of them because I've not seen them play, but just based on looking at their record in the first few games, I just anticipate that Coosa is going to be a little bit more diverse than Haralson County is in this game, and I'm going to pick Coosa to win.
Gotcha. Moving on. Allatoona at Rome. The Wolves 1-1 on the season. Allatoona 2-0 in the crazy Region 5 5A mix. We've had a couple of upsets already in region play. Of course, South Paulding knocked off Rome the first week. North Paulding knocked off East Paulding the first week. And then last week, New Manchester knocked off North Paulding. So there's a little bit of a shakeup there. Allatoona is in prime position to grab the region title right now. I know it's only the third week of the season, but in an all-region schedule, you can't have two losses and win a region title just about. That being said, if Rome wants any chance at a district title, region, districts in Florida, regions in Georgia, the region title, Rome has to beat Allatoona. It is at Barron Stadium. The AJC back about a year ago said that Barron Stadium is one of the top 10 toughest places to play in the whole state. Over the last 5 years, that really hasn't been proven true, but hey, maybe this time it will be. Rome's going to have to pass the ball, I'm afraid, to beat Allatoona. Allatoona handled them without a problem last year. I don't see it happening. I'm going to be there covering the game. I sincerely hope it does, but I say Allatoona takes Rome to 1-2 on the season. What about you, Matt?
Allatoona first week of the season, 50-0 over Woodland. Second week of the season, 39-0 over Paulding County. They have not been scored on. It's going to be an accomplishment for Rome to get on the field and be the first team to score against them this year. They are a tough team. We were talking about Carrollton earlier playing against Calhoun, and I made the comment that you're looking at a team that looks like they have arrived. Well, Allatoona's been there for a couple of years. I mean, they're a really great team. I don't care where this game's played. Rome, they showed a lot of poise in their first week of the season to have a situation where they're down 34-14 and make a nice comeback. That showed a lot of resolve for that team, even though they ended up losing the game. I think that's one of the positives you take from it. Last week, they beat a team they should beat. I think that Rome still has a lot to prove on this young season. Meanwhile, Allatoona has proven that they're a really solid team. Yeah. So, I think that in this game it's solid if you're going to go with Allatoona, and I am.
And one thing to note, the two wins Allatoona has have come against teams that aren't very good and weren't very good last year. Sure. So this will be Allatoona's first test. We're not sure how good South Paulding was, but they were able to beat Rome. They weren't bad last year. We'll just wait and see. Moving on, Murray County travels to Gordon Central. The Warriors 0-2 on the season. Murray County is 0 for a whole bunch of games, including 0-2 this year. Gordon Central is awfully young, but I do not see them losing to Murray County. Matt, what do you think?
I don't either. I was told by one of the coaches from 7AA this year leading up to the season that one of the positives for Murray County is that their numbers in terms of kids coming out for the football team have gone up. We haven't really seen, the positive side of that yet, but that does tell me they're trying to build their program back up. And I know Murray County in the past has had a decent football program, and times have changed. They've really struggled. Gordon Central, as you mentioned, they lost a lot of players from last year. They've been feeling the pain of that. This is an opportunity for them, against a team that shouldn't be able to compete very well with them, to have an opportunity to grow some confidence and have some positive things happen that they haven't had happen so far on this young season. So I see a big opportunity for Gordon Central. Maybe it'll turn into an opportunity for Murray County, but I think that Gordon Central is going to have a lot more talent on the field than Murray County in this game.
Yeah, I agree with you. Moving on, Model of Sonoraville, in my opinion, probably the toughest game all week to pick. Model comes into this game 1-1, won their first game against a Class A opponent, lost last week at home badly to another Class A opponent. Of course, Sonoraville is 0-2 on the season, has not looked that good. This is such a tough pick for me. I was there last year when Sonoraville upset Model. When I look at Model, what I see, the biggest positive I see here is if it's a close game, they have a very good kicker. I don't know what to think about Model so far. I definitely don't know what to think about Sonoraville. I'm just going to go with what I saw last year, and my gut feeling is Sonoraville knows this is one of their best chances to get a win this year, and it's at Sonoraville. I'm going to say Sonoraville beats the Blue Devils. Matt?
This one's a tough one to pick, and last week I was saying that if Model, once they got past the game last week, that this would be a foregone conclusion that they would win. I'm backtracking on that a little bit. And
Funny, because I kind of mentioned that on the TV and on the radio show last week, that everybody really wanted to go ahead and say that. I'm like, Don't jump on the Model bandwagon just yet.
Well, it's not unfounded. One of the things that really concerns me in this game is, with the way Model lost that game last year, they're aware of that coming into this game. One of the reasons they struggled last week, from what I read in the Rome News Tribune, and from comments that were actually made in quotes from Gordon Powers, was the fact that he was very disappointed in the mental errors that took place in the game and the penalties that they had. And that's what concerns me about this game. You're coming to the game, I still think Model is going to be a better team, but if they come out here and it's inside their heads of what happened last year and they let that get to them, then you're going to see some of those mental things start to pop up in this game again, and that creates all kind of problems. And in situations like that, you see better teams lose because of the mental aspects of the game. So I'm going with Model. I still think they're a better team than Sonoraville, but they've got to trim down on those penalties and the mental mistakes that they made in the game last week.
Definitely. Cartersville at Rockmart. Cartersville Purple Hurricanes 2-0 in the season, probably one of the best teams in all of AAA. Rockmart 1-1 on the season, definitely not one of the best teams in all of AAA. Not saying they're not great, but they're not Cartersville by any stretch of the imagination. Look, Rockmart's got a ton of athletes, but turnovers and penalties have been killing them. And even if it being at Rockmart, even if Rockmart plays the game of their lives, Cartersville still wins this. Matt?
I'm with you on this one. One of the things that kind of surprised me about Rockmart last week is the fact they run an option type offense, but it didn't seem like they had the speed to get out to the edge like you typically see in teams that are successful at running the option.
Yeah.
They had a big back named Thompson that could muscle through and get yards, and when they went into overtime, I thought this is not going to be good for Coosa because the way that kid runs the ball, keeps his wheels turning, and drags the pile. And it turns out that kind of ended up being part of what got them in the end zone and winning that game for them. But against a very disciplined team like Cartersville that has weapons all over the field and is not going to make the kind of mistakes that Rockmart made in the game against Coosa last week, you can't rack up that many penalties against Cartersville and expect to have success. And a lot of the penalties that Rockmart had in the game were personal fouls, having situations where they're in the huddle and then all of a sudden here comes out a yellow flag from one of the officials, those kinds of things. And those things can be prevented. So, to me, for Rockmart to have any chance of success in this game, they're going to have to grow a lot of discipline in a short amount of time. And unfortunately, I think those types of things take a little time to iron out. So Cartersville's just a much better team. They're going to win this game.
Gotcha. One last game to talk about. Unity Christian hitting the road to take on Loganville Christian at Loganville Christian. Unity Christian 2-1 on the season. Loganville is 3-0. This is a North ICSGA region game. Of course, Unity right now is 1-0 in region play. I believe Loganville is 1-0 as well. I look at this on paper, and the number one thing I see is Unity's got a very good offense. They can score a lot of points, but the defense is not there yet. Granted, last week they pitched a shutout against a team that I think has not scored yet. Loganville Christian, they've played common opponents with Unity and have held those opponents to a lot less points than Unity has. Loganville's a very, very good team. Unity is an up-and-coming team. if Unity can get into a track meet with Loganville, they have a chance, and that might turn into it with Anderson Kruger, a quarterback who's thrown for a ridiculous amount of yards after just 3 games this season. They've got the wideouts. The problem I see is I'm just not so sure Unity's going to be able to stop Loganville Christian's offense. I believe Unity will lose this game, but I think this is a stepping stone for Unity because Joe Curtis's teams never peak in the middle of the season. They usually always peak toward the end, and this is a game that Unity will think about now and maybe later in the playoffs remember if they get another shot at these guys. I say Unity loses. Matt?
This is the first time that I'm going to do this season, but I'm going to pick against Unity, and for the reason you just mentioned. They have not proven themselves on the defensive side of the ball, and as you mentioned, I pitched a shutout last week, but so have the first couple of teams that faced them as well. So obviously the team they played against last week has really got some issues. So I'm going to go with Loganville in this game. They have been a pretty good team over the last couple of years. I think they're going to be a formidable foe. I think the Lions, will be competitive in this game. As you mentioned, the offense is pretty stout, and I'm one of those guys that when I watch a football team, I like to see offenses that are not one-dimensional. And a lot of times you get guys that are just wanting to be too conservative and not give their playmakers an opportunity. Joe Curtis is not that guy. No. He's going to try to get the ball to his playmakers, and that's what they're going to do in this game, which will give them a shot. But at the end of the day, I got to pick against Unity in this game. I'm going with Loganville.
Gotcha. And those are our picks for this week. That's it. That's all we got. A few other games around the area we didn't talk about tonight. You can come on to PrepCentralOnline.com to see articles, photos, of course, videos from our coverage, and of course, stick with us Friday night. The Gridiron Central Scoreboard Show will kick off later in the evening. You'll get it later in the day on Saturday for all the coverage of everything. And of course, also stick around with PrepCentralOnline.com as we cover softball, volleyball, cross country, and every other prep sport around. For Kevin Myrick, Matt Davis, I'm Jim Allred saying we'll see you on the sidelines.